On today's episode of Survival Dispatch News, we're taking another look at the fentanyl crisis and addressing some of the comments that y'all made in the previous episode.
Hey guys, today's video is sponsored by the Wuben Nightlight. That's spelled K-N-I-G-H-T, by the way. And as always, we want you to know that Wuben didn't pay us to have their product in today's video. They did, however, send us this awesome little Wuben Nightlight. This is a great little light with lots of great features. We've got a variable output, 1100 lumens of light here. Of course, you can run it at a lower output. It's also got a strobe function as well. And as I mentioned, it's rechargeable. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm telling you now. It runs off a lithium battery. It is rechargeable, and it has a waterproof Type-C charging port as well. There's also a pocket clip. There's a magnetic function that allows you to stabilize it, stick it just about anywhere in any position as well. Now, you've heard me say many times, I think everybody should have a portable light. And I think this little light would be a great addition to anyone's EDC kit. Make sure you hit the link. We've got it in the description so you can check out the Wuben Night Exo Light.
And we're back. Today's video is a follow-up to our previous fentanyl episode of Survival Dispatch News, because we wanted to correct some errors and omissions made on our part. So this time we brought back Dr. Michael Fabian to address some of the comments that were made by people on the previous episode. And we're going to start right away by saying one aspect that we neglected to mention in the last video is that fentanyl is widely distributed in pill form, posing as other types of opioids like Percocet. Mike, jump in.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Chris, for having me back. If you hear a few gunshots in the background, that's my neighbors practicing, so please don't worry, I don't have to duck. They're very good. Again, as Chris was mentioning, there are a couple of things to discuss. One of those is that fentanyl is in pill form now. Most of the folks that use it that way don't just take it orally, they'll crush it up and inject it. One of the problems, and this occurred before COVID, and it's very important for people to understand this, some people used to be able to get fentanyl mail order via China. And the problem was the manufacturing process wasn't very pure. And what was happening, and I'm sure it's the same with the Mexican substances that have been obtained, is that it's laced with impurities. And the impurities are, and to understand a little bit of the science, fentanyl is a drug that is synthetically manufactured, and it's used for, as Chris had mentioned previously, the medical profession to put people to sleep and have them have less pain. The problem is there's a couple of other drugs that are congeners, which means they're kind of changed. There's a little side chain that's changed, and it makes it much more potent. There's another one called sufentanil, which was 10 times as strong as fentanyl, and then carfentanil, which is 1,000 times stronger. The carfentanil, some of you already know as rhinoceros tranquilizer. And so if anybody gets even a little bit of that in as an impurity, they'll die. They'll stop breathing unless you got someone with the Narcan immediately available. And then you've got to get to the hospital because the Narcan has a shorter half-life and it'll help for a while, and then the person will stop breathing again. So it's important to understand, even before COVID, we were having problems from people getting it mail order. The other problem more recently, like Chris had mentioned, is that we've got a lot of drugs coming in through the southern border now, basically unchecked, and it's being distributed to the cities. And it's the same, there's no manufacturing qualifications or standards. And so a lot of these drugs have impurities in them. And it's the sufentanil and especially the carfentanil. You only need a microgram amount, and it'll make you stop breathing. And so it's real important to understand we lost approximately 113,000 people to drug overdoses in the last 2 years. And that's substantial. That's a healthcare crisis. And, again, I'm not political, but, making drugs legal doesn't make that problem go away. It just makes it worse. So if you have friends or whoever, having the Narcan available is a very good thing to have in your EDC or in your FAK, like Chris was talking about in the last episode. So just to address those sorts of things. The other thing Chris and I were talking about is with the police officers. Most of the time they won't send, and I've talked to a couple of officers, they don't send their canine units in anymore if there's a drug house. Because if the dog sniffs any of that carfentanil, they'll stop breathing, they'll be in the house, and they'll die. And so they've got to be real careful, especially with their gloves and everything else. The EMTs have there's a short video on that, on how to not handle anything. And so those are other important facts to know about. And Chris, redirect me and get me back to the matters at hand.
Well, you're right on topic. I was just going to mention that a number of people commented it and took issue with us mentioning, police going down after physically coming in contact with fentanyl or fentanyl-laced drugs. So we did a little bit deeper digging, and, there's certainly a lot of, news reports of that happening, but we couldn't find any instances where it was 100% proven that first responder absorbed fentanyl through their skin and went into an overdose. So the commenters appear to be correct on that, and we were wrong. Well, we were repeating information that was wrong. But I did come across a couple things where it was mentioned that if a person had an open wound or they ingested it, through their mouth or even nose or eyes, that they could have adverse effects. So maybe you could speak to that and make sure that that's correct.
Absolutely. Okay. The main thing on that is that you can't really absorb it through your skin. It's a mucous membrane. So your eyes, your nose, your mouth. And so, for example, if you touch something and then you rub your eyes, that's how you could absorb it. So it's not really from your skin, but it's any mucous membrane. And that's why people inject it, so they can get high. If you just swallow the pill, it takes a while, and it doesn't give them the desired effect. So that's one of the points to talk about.
Okay, yeah. So the bioavailability of oral or touching a membrane is just not the same as IV usage, essentially.
True, but again, if you touch a mucous membrane, so snorting it, putting it in your mouth, under your tongue, grinding it up, and then putting it under your tongue, and then also having some of the powder, the fine powder, on your hand, and then rubbing your eye. Again, the police and EMTs have gotten very safe about putting gloves on all the time,
right?
And they know how to deglove carefully so that they don't get any of the contaminants on them.
So just an off the wall question. So let's say that they pulled somebody over who was doing illicit drugs laced with fentanyl in powder form, and either it was windy, or let's say the person in the car threw it at the cops. Could they ingest that by breathing and have adverse effects from that?
Possibly, but the chances of that causing them an adverse event where they stop breathing is pretty low. Okay. Usually when something's dispersed, and we haven't talked about this, but having bioweapons, for example, like dispersing it from the air, like from an airplane, it gets so dispersed that by the time it touches someone, it's at such a minute amount, it usually isn't as effective as the desired thing. So throwing at the cop, first of all, is going to get them a felony arrest for attempted murder, because if it is fentanyl, it could hurt them, in addition to all of the other things that the cops would add on to their long list of crimes or charges that they would get if they did that.
So long story short is that first responders, pretty much no chance that they would overdose by coming in contact with their skin. But if they did get it on their hands or gloves and they touched any of those mucous membranes that you mentioned, they could potentially have adverse effects.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Going back through our notes here as well, a few subscribers took issue, commenters, that we mentioned fentanyl being used to step on heavy and soft drugs like pot. We did find that there are a number of articles out there stating that a lab confirmed that pot was laced with fentanyl, but there were very few. There weren't a whole lot of them. So is that an instance, like, just for argument's sake, if there was, some fentanyl in pot and the person ate it or smoked it, what could they potentially have adverse effects from that?
Inhaling it would be the way if they smoked it. And I think a lot of the drug dealers, the folks that do pot are kind of a lower level user, and right. Lacing it with some of those stronger drugs is going to be more cost. And like you guys mentioned in your other video, you don't want to kill your market. So right. Usually it's pretty rare. They're not going to add other things to the cocktail. Folks that smoke pot, for whatever reason they do it, they just really want that drug. Some of them have chronic pain and they smoke it for that reason. Gotcha. But the fentanyl is not really ideal for what they're using it for. So their market wouldn't be very good.
Makes sense. Makes business sense. Doesn't make moral sense.
Yes, and that's really,
sense.
and that's where I'm coming from. I mean, we may get some subscribers that will say, "Oh, no, that's not true at all." Well, then give us the examples. But again, it's expensive to do that, and you've got to have a little bit of chemical experience to be able to do that. So, and I'm sure there's folks out there that know how to do it, but it's not the rule. It would be an exception.
Yeah. So before we move on to the last topic, we'll put some links down below in the description that provide some news stories that cover the bullets that we've discussed so far. But the last one, which was news to us, is that in most states you can get Narcan for free. And some people mention, you can go to methadone clinics, those sort of things, and they'll just give them away, and that the cops are happy to have people have it on them because it potentially save a life and whatnot. So you called in a script for me at Publix pharmacy. We weren't sure what the process was going to be until my wife went and picked it up today. And this is the box, and it's the generic form, but it's two bottles of nasal spray, 2 doses worth. And so I understand there's 2 doses in these boxes for a couple of reasons. Some people, it takes more than 1 dose to resuscitate them. And in other instances, the person who's administering this may be exposed as well. So there's a dose safe for them. And there are instances where there's more than one person who suffered an overdose. And by having 2 in here, hopefully you don't have to choose who survives and who doesn't survive. What are your comments on this product, Mike?
All of those comments were correct. 2 things, though. First, there's 2 doses because if you're an hour away from medical care and you dose somebody, remember I mentioned that a lot of times the narcotics have a longer half-life than the Narcan. And so the Narcan will wear off and those people will stop breathing again. And so sometimes you need to redose them before you get to the hospital, unless you can intubate them and breathe for them. And so the 2 doses are basically so that if you're more than 10 minutes from medical care, it allows you to be able to redose someone as well. I would also comment about viewers out there, if you want to check with your pharmacy and see if you can just pick it up without a prescription. I've actually looked online, and a lot of the states like California, New York especially, have it for free available. And if you can get it for free without a prescription, even better, because then you can have doses that you would like to have. And it's not in your medical record. Again, that's a personal preference. But I don't see any reason why you should have to get your physician to do it if you can get it for free without a prescription. I would look at your local pharmacy and see if they'll do it for you.
Yeah, I can confirm. I found quite a few instances online in different states where people said that CVS, Walgreens, whatever, you can walk in and buy it from the pharmacy without a script, or actually get it for free at the pharmacy, I should say. So that's interesting as well. So before we wrap up here, Mike, we've had you on Survival Dispatch a number of times, and I don't recall if we've mentioned this too much in the past, but you're working on your homestead right now, actively, participate in homesteading and prepping and all those kinds of things. And today you're working on your beehives, correct?
Yes.
So
just checking on them because we had a cold snap 2 weeks ago, and just making sure that they're all doing well, and they're quite happy. So, and that's natural honey. And, anybody that's out there that's a hobbyist knows if you eat your own honey from your local areas, that has antigens in it, that will help people that have allergies and whatnot. And it's a natural sweetener, so it helps. In addition, you're helping to pollinate all of the local plants, and you're helping the farmers and everybody else nearby.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mike. That's great to know. So we'll wrap up there. I appreciate you coming on and providing some clarification, Mike, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thanks for having me, Chris. And again, if anyone has comments, I'm all open to listen and can certainly respond. Thanks again, Chris.